The clash between Rome and Dacia stands as one of ancient history's most dramatic military confrontations. When Emperor Trajan led his legions across the Danube River in 101 CE, he faced a formidable enemy, the warrior kingdom of Dacia, led by the cunning king Decebalus. This conflict would reshape the map of Europe, test Roman military doctrine to its limits, and ultimately demonstrate the terrifying efficiency of the Roman war machine at its zenith. The Dacian threat, a kingdom too dangerous to ignore. Dacia occupied the strategic highlands of modern-day Romania, a fortress realm protected by the Carpathian Mountains and enriched by vast gold and silver deposits. Under Decebalus, who seized power around 87 CE, the Dacians had transformed from scattered tribes into a centralized military state. This was no collection of primitive barbarians. The Dacians possessed advanced metallurgy, sophisticated fortifications, and a warrior culture that valued courage above all else. The Dacian military threat had grown increasingly severe throughout the late 1st century. King Decebalus had unified the tribes under his banner, creating a standing army that could field tens of thousands of warriors. Their signature weapon, the fearsome falx, a curved blade capable of cleaving through Roman helmets and shields, had already demonstrated its lethal effectiveness against Roman forces. During the reign of Emperor Domitian, the Dacians had humiliated Rome, defeating Roman legions and forcing the empire to pay what amounted to tribute disguised as subsidies. For the newly crowned Emperor Trajan, this situation was intolerable. The Dacian kingdom represented both a strategic threat and an irresistible prize. Decebalus controlled access to gold mines that could fill Rome's treasury, and his kingdom sat astride key trade routes linking the empire to the steppes beyond. Moreover, Dacian raids across the Danube threatened the stability of Rome's northern provinces. The time had come for a reckoning. Trajan, the soldier emperor, Marcus Ulpius Traianus, was no ordinary emperor. Born in Hispania to a military family, Trajan had risen through the ranks on merit, commanding legions in Syria and Germania before adoption by Emperor Nerva secured his succession. Unlike many emperors who viewed military campaigns as political necessities, Trajan was a genuine soldier who understood warfare at every level, from the strategic movements of entire armies to the tactical deployment of individual cohorts. Trajan brought to the Dacian problem a combination of careful planning and ruthless determination. He spent the year 100 CE preparing for war with meticulous attention to detail. New legions were recruited and trained. Supply depots were established along the Danube. Most impressively, Trajan ordered the construction of a massive stone bridge across the Danube River, an engineering marvel that would allow his forces to cross the frontier in strength, regardless of season or weather. The emperor understood that defeating Dacia required more than battlefield victories. The mountainous terrain favored defenders, and Decebalus had spent years fortifying his kingdom with stone citadels and hilltop fortresses. Roman victory would demand superior logistics, disciplined execution, and the willingness to wage a war of attrition that would grind down Dacian resistance. The Roman war machine. Organization and superiority. The Roman military that Trajan led into Dacia represented centuries of tactical evolution and institutional experience. At its core were the legions, heavy infantry formations of approximately 5,000 citizen soldiers, each organized into cohorts and centuries with brutal efficiency. These were professional troops, enlisted for 25 years of service, trained to march 20 miles in 5 hours while carrying 60 pounds of equipment, and drilled relentlessly in the tactics that had conquered the Mediterranean world. Supporting the legions were auxiliary units recruited from non-citizen populations across the empire. These specialized forces provided cavalry, archers, and light infantry that complemented the heavy infantry tactics of the legions. Auxiliary cavalry in particular would prove crucial in the Dacian campaigns, providing reconnaissance, screening movements, and pursuit capabilities that the infantry-heavy legions lacked. Roman engineering capabilities gave them a decisive advantage in mountain warfare. Each legion included specialists in siege warfare, fortification construction, and field engineering. They could construct fortified camps every night of a campaign, build roads through hostile territory, and reduce enemy strongholds with siege towers, battering rams, and artillery. The legionaries themselves were trained in construction techniques, making every Roman army a mobile engineering force. Roman discipline was perhaps their greatest weapon. Where Dacian warriors fought with individual courage and ferocity, Roman soldiers fought as interconnected units, each man trained to maintain formation even under the most desperate circumstances. This discipline transformed thousands of individual soldiers into a single, deadly organism that could execute complex maneuvers under fire and maintain cohesion in the chaos of battle. Decebalus, the warrior king. Decebalus was a formidable opponent who understood both the strengths and weaknesses of his position. Ancient sources describe him as intelligent, brave, and skilled in both warfare and diplomacy. He had spent years preparing Dacia for inevitable Roman invasion, transforming the kingdom's natural defenses into an integrated system of fortifications. The Dacian military under Decebalus combined tribal warrior traditions with elements borrowed from contact with Rome and other neighboring powers. Dacian warriors were renowned for their courage and ferocity in battle. They fought primarily as infantry, armed with the terrifying falx, spears, and shields. The falx in particular struck fear into Roman soldiers. This two-handed curved blade could shear through the standardized Roman equipment that had proven effective against other enemies. Decebalus had also invested heavily in fortifications. The Dacian capital of Sarmizegetusa Regia sat high in the Orasti Mountains, protected by massive stone walls and accessible only through narrow mountain passes. Surrounding this core were dozens of smaller fortresses and hilltop strongholds, each positioned to control strategic routes and provide mutual support. This defensive network meant that even if the Romans defeated Dacian armies in the field, they would face a grinding campaign to reduce fortified positions one by one. The Dacian king had allies as well. Neighboring tribes, some motivated by shared interests and others by Roman bribes channeled through Dacian hands, could be called upon to harass Roman supply lines and tie down occupation forces. Decebalus also maintained diplomatic contacts with the Parthian Empire in the east, Rome's great rival, though whether this amounted to active coordination remains debated by historians. The First Dacian War. Opening moves. In the spring of 101 CE, Trajan launched his invasion with approximately 150,000 troops, perhaps 11 or 12 legions supported by roughly equal numbers of auxiliaries. This was one of the largest armies Rome had assembled in decades, reflecting both the seriousness of the Dacian threat and the wealth of resources Trajan could mobilize. The Roman strategy aimed to strike directly at the heart of Dacian power. Rather than securing the periphery first, Trajan planned to advance through the Iron Gates Gorge and into the Transylvanian Plateau, threatening Sarmizegetusa itself. This bold approach carried risks: extended supply lines through hostile territory, vulnerability to ambush in mountain passes, but Trajan calculated that only decisive offensive action could break Dacian power before winter. The Dacians did not wait passively for invasion. Decebalus launched his own preemptive strike, sending forces across the Danube to attack Roman positions and disrupt the invasion buildup. These raids achieved tactical surprises, but could not prevent the Roman advance. As Trajan's legions crossed the Danube and began their march into Dacian territory, the stage was set for the massive confrontations that would determine the war's outcome. The Battle of Tapae, where legions met warriors. The decisive engagement of the first campaign occurred at Tapae, a strategic pass controlling access to the Transylvanian plateau. Here, perhaps in late 101 or early 102 CE, Decebalus concentrated his main army. Ancient sources suggest upward of 80,000 warriors, though modern scholars debate whether this figure represents actual combatants or includes non-combat followers. Regardless of exact numbers, the Dacians assembled a massive force determined to halt the Roman advance. The terrain favored the defenders. The pass was narrow, limiting the frontage on which the Romans could deploy their superior numbers and negating much of their advantage in coordinated maneuver. Dacian forces held the high ground, positioned to rain javelins and arrows down on the advancing Romans. Decebalus had chosen his ground well, forcing Trajan to attack under the worst possible conditions or find another route, which would mean weeks of delay and loss of momentum. Trajan accepted battle. The Roman approach to the engagement demonstrated their systematic method of warfare. Rather than rushing forward in a headlong assault, the legions advanced in carefully maintained formation, shields raised against missile fire. Roman artillery, bolt-throwing ballistae and stone-hurling onagers, provided suppressing fire, targeting Dacian concentrations and forcing defenders to keep their heads down. Auxiliary archers engaged in counter-battery fire against Dacian missile troops. The initial Roman assault faced withering resistance. Dacian warriors, fighting for their homeland and led by a king who fought personally in the front ranks, contested every foot of ground. The falx proved its terrible effectiveness, cleaving through Roman shields and helmets. Casualties mounted rapidly as legionaries struggled forward against an enemy that refused to break. Ancient accounts describe desperate fighting, with Roman wounded continuing to fight even with severe injuries. What turned the battle was Roman discipline and reserves. As initial assault waves suffered casualties, fresh cohorts advanced to maintain pressure. The Romans rotated tired units out of contact while maintaining an unbroken line, a complex maneuver that required extraordinary training and cohesion. The Dacians, fighting with individual courage but without equivalent organizational flexibility, could not match this systematic approach. Gradually, relentlessly, the Romans ground forward. Legionaries in the front ranks fought defensively, using their shields and disciplined formations to create opportunities for the men behind them. As Dacian warriors tired from continuous combat, Roman pressure intensified. When sections of the Dacian line finally began to waver, Roman cavalry, which had been maneuvering around the flanks throughout the engagement, charged home, exploiting gaps and creating panic. The Dacian retreat quickly became a rout. Warriors who had fought with desperate courage broke and fled as the organized Roman pursuit cut them down. Ancient sources claim tens of thousands of Dacian casualties, though such figures should be treated cautiously. What is clear is that Decebalus's army was shattered as an organized force. The Battle of Tapae had opened the road to the Dacian heartland. The Siege Campaign. Breaking the mountain fortresses. Victory at Tapae did not end the war. Decebalus retreated to his fortified strongholds, and the Romans faced the grinding work of reducing them one by one. This phase of the campaign demonstrated Roman siege warfare at its most systematic and brutal. Roman siege tactics followed a well-established pattern refined through centuries of experience. Engineers surveyed each fortress, identifying weaknesses and planning the approach. Soldiers constructed siege works, circumvallation lines to prevent escape, assault towers to overtop walls, and ramps to allow direct assault. This work proceeded methodically, with legionaries performing heavy labor under the protection of mobile shelters, while specialists prepared artillery positions. The psychological effect of Roman siege preparations was itself a weapon. Defenders watching the systematic construction of siege works understood the inevitable outcome. Some strongholds surrendered rather than face assault. Others resisted desperately, forcing the Romans to take them by storm. When Romans breached walls and poured into a fortress that had resisted, they offered no mercy. The massacre of defenders served as an object lesson to other garrisons contemplating resistance. Dacian fortifications, though impressive by contemporary standards, could not withstand sustained Roman assault. Stone walls that would stop tribal raiders crumbled under concentrated artillery bombardment. Defenders who might have held out for months in earlier eras faced an enemy with unlimited manpower for siege works and the technical expertise to overcome any static defense. One by one, the Dacian strongholds fell. The first peace, a temporary resolution. By 102 CE, Decebalus's military position had become untenable. His field army was destroyed, his fortifications were falling, and Roman forces were approaching Sarmizegetusa itself. The Dacian king sued for peace, and Trajan, facing the onset of winter and perhaps concerned about overextension, accepted. The peace terms reflected Dacian defeat, but fell short of total conquest. Decebalus remained king, but effectively became a Roman client. He surrendered his siege equipment and agreed to provide military support to Rome when requested. Roman garrisons occupied strategic positions throughout Dacia, and Trajan claimed a triumph for what appeared to be decisive victory. This peace would prove temporary. Decebalus had no intention of remaining a Roman puppet, and Trajan had not secured the permanent settlement he sought. The treaty bought both sides time, Decebalus to rebuild his forces, and Trajan to prepare for a final campaign that would end the Dacian problem permanently. The Second War. Total conquest. In 105 CE, Trajan returned to Dacia with an even larger army. The justification was Dacian violations of the peace terms. Decebalus had been rebuilding fortifications and soliciting support from neighboring tribes. The reality was that Trajan had decided only complete annexation would secure Rome's northern frontier. The second campaign was shorter, but even more brutal than the first. Roman forces advanced on multiple axes systematically, reducing any remaining resistance. The earlier war had broken Dacian military power. This campaign aimed at total subjugation. Decebalus's forces, outnumbered and outmatched, fought desperately, but could not halt the Roman advance. The siege of Sarmizegetusa Regia represented the climax of the war. The Dacian capital, perched high in the mountains and protected by massive fortifications, was the ultimate symbol of Dacian independence. Roman engineers constructed assault ramps and brought artillery to bear against walls that had never before faced such concentrated attack. When the Romans finally breached the defenses and poured into the city, they found that Decebalus had fled. The Dacian king's flight ended in the forests north of the capital. Cornered by Roman cavalry, Decebalus chose suicide over capture, slitting his own throat rather than being paraded in Trajan's triumph. His severed head was brought to Trajan as proof that the war was finally over. The aftermath. Dacia becomes a province. Trajan's victory was total and crushing. Dacia ceased to exist as an independent kingdom and became a Roman province. The transformation was immediate and comprehensive. Roman colonists poured into the new province, Roman law replaced Dacian customs, and Latin began displacing the native language. The gold mines that had enriched Decebalus now filled Roman treasuries. The human cost was staggering. Ancient sources claim that 500,000 Dacians were killed or enslaved during the two wars, likely an exaggeration, but indicative of the scale of devastation. The Dacian aristocracy was effectively eliminated, their fortresses dismantled, and their military traditions suppressed. The systematic nature of Roman conquest left little room for Dacian culture to survive in organized form. Trajan commemorated his victory with monuments that remain among ancient Rome's most impressive artistic achievements. Trajan's Column in Rome, completed in 113 CE, depicts the Dacian campaigns in a continuous spiral relief of intricate detail. The column shows Roman soldiers building fortifications, marching through mountains, engaging in battle, and reducing Dacian strongholds, a comprehensive visual record of military operations that provides historians with invaluable insights into Roman warfare. Why Rome? 1. Analyzing the crushing victory. The Roman victory over Dacia resulted from multiple overlapping advantages that proved decisive when combined. Understanding these factors illuminates not just this particular campaign, but the broader question of how Rome conquered and held such a vast empire. Organizational superiority was fundamental. The Roman military was a professional institution with standardized training, equipment, and tactics. Every legionary knew his place in formation, understood the commands of his officers, and could execute complex maneuvers under battlefield stress. The Dacians, despite their courage and the reforms Decebalus had implemented, remained fundamentally a warrior society that emphasized individual prowess over collective discipline. Logistical capabilities gave Rome strategic flexibility. The massive supply infrastructure that Trajan constructed, bridges, roads, fortified supply depots, allowed Roman forces to maintain operations through multiple campaigning seasons. The Dacians, dependent on local resources and seasonal agriculture, could not sustain equivalent efforts. Roman soldiers ate regularly, received replacements for damaged equipment, and knew that wounded comrades would receive medical care. These prosaic advantages translated into maintained combat effectiveness over extended periods. Engineering expertise allowed Romans to overcome Dacia's natural defenses. Every Roman legion included engineers capable of building bridges, constructing siege equipment, and reducing fortifications. Where Dacian warriors saw an impassable gorge or impregnable fortress, Roman engineers saw a problem with a technical solution. This capacity to reshape the battlefield environment gave Roman commanders options unavailable to their opponents. Tactical flexibility enabled Romans to adapt to Dacian tactics. When the falques proved deadly against standard equipment, Romans modified their helmets and developed tactics to minimize exposure. When mountain passes favored defenders, Romans used auxiliary forces to infiltrate and outflank positions. The Roman military was a learning organization that systematically incorporated lessons from each engagement. Strategic vision guided the entire campaign. Trajan's decision to strike directly at Dacia's heartland, rather than securing the periphery first, demonstrated understanding of the war's strategic logic. By threatening Sarmizegetusa, Trajan forced Decebalus to commit his forces to defensive battles on Roman terms. The systematic reduction of fortifications in the Second War reflected clear strategic thinking. Destroy the infrastructure of resistance and make future rebellion impossible. Economic resources underpinned everything else. Rome could recruit and equip armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands, sustain them in the field for years, and absorb casualties that would have been catastrophic for smaller states. The empire's wealth, drawn from territories spanning from Britain to Syria, gave Roman emperors military options unavailable to regional powers like Dacia. The human cost. Understanding ancient warfare's brutality. Modern audiences often romanticize ancient battles, focusing on tactical maneuvers and heroic stands while overlooking the sheer horror of pre-modern combat. The Dacian Wars deserve examination not just as military history, but as human tragedy. Battle in the ancient world was intensely personal and brutal. Soldiers fought within arm's reach of their enemies, seeing their faces as they killed. The wounded often died slowly from shock, blood loss, or infection, as ancient medicine could do little for serious injuries. Legionaries struck by a falx might survive the initial blow, only to die days later from infected wounds, in agony that no available treatment could relieve. The civilian population suffered immensely. Roman armies requisitioned supplies from the countryside, leaving local populations to face starvation. Refugees fleeing the fighting died from exposure, disease, and banditry. When Romans captured fortresses, they frequently massacred military-age males and enslaved women and children. Enslavement meant transport to distant parts of the empire, separation from families, and life as property subject to the absolute power of an owner. The transformation of Dacia into a Roman province involved cultural destruction on a massive scale. The Dacian language, religion, and social structures were systematically suppressed. The aristocratic class that had provided cultural leadership was eliminated. Within a few generations, Dacia had been so thoroughly Romanized that historians struggle to reconstruct what Dacian culture was like before the conquest. Legacy. How the Dacian conquest shaped history. Trajan's conquest of Dacia had consequences extending far beyond the immediate military victory. The annexation of Dacia represented the Roman Empire at its maximum territorial extent. Never again would Rome expand its frontiers so dramatically. The wealth extracted from Dacian gold mines funded Trajan's building programs in Rome and temporarily relieved financial pressures facing the empire. Militarily, the Dacian Wars demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of Roman power. The systematic, disciplined approach to warfare that crushed Dacian resistance would continue to serve Rome well for generations. Yet the campaigns also revealed how resource-intensive conquest had become. The forces required to defeat Dacia and garrison the new province represented an enormous investment of military manpower at a time when Roman recruitment was becoming increasingly difficult. The Romanization of Dacia proved remarkably thorough and lasting. Despite Rome's withdrawal from the province in the 3rd century CE, under pressure from migrations and invasions, the Latin language survived and evolved into Romanian. Modern Romanians are in many ways descendants of Roman colonists and Romanized Dacians, carrying forward a linguistic and cultural heritage created by Trajan's conquest. The Dacian Wars also established Trajan's reputation as one of Rome's greatest emperors. His military success, combined with administrative competence and popular building programs, made him a legendary figure. Later emperors, including Constantine, invoked Trajan's memory. The phrase Optimus Princeps, best of emperors, became permanently associated with Trajan's name, in large part because of his Dacian triumph. Conclusion. The crushing of Dacia and the nature of empire. The Roman destruction of Dacia stands as a defining example of ancient military power at its apex. The systematic manner in which Roman legions crushed 80,000 Dacian warriors and dismantled an independent kingdom reveals the characteristics that made Rome dominant: superior organization, disciplined execution, overwhelming resources, and ruthless determination. Yet this victory also illuminates the darker aspects of ancient empire. The human suffering involved, hundreds of thousands killed or enslaved, a culture effectively erased, a people subjugated, reminds us that imperial glory was purchased through tremendous violence. The monuments celebrating Trajan's triumph, impressive as they are, represent one perspective on events that meant catastrophic defeat and cultural annihilation for the Dacians. The military lessons of the Dacian Wars remain relevant. The campaigns demonstrate how disciplined, well-led forces with superior logistics can overcome enemies fighting on advantageous terrain. They show the value of engineering capabilities and tactical flexibility. They illustrate how strategic vision guides successful campaigns and how economic resources enable sustained military effort. For the Dacians, defeat meant the end of independence and cultural extinction. For Rome, victory meant territorial expansion, tremendous wealth, and enhanced prestige, but also the burdens of garrisoning and administering distant provinces. Within less than 2 centuries, Rome would withdraw from Dacia, unable to defend frontiers that had become dangerously overextended. The crushing of the Dacian warriors by Trajan's legions represents a moment when one civilization's military superiority proved decisive and absolute. It stands as testament to Roman military excellence and as warning about the costs, human, cultural, and ultimately strategic, of conquest pursued without limit. The victory was complete, the triumph celebrated, but the long-term consequences would prove more complex than contemporaries imagined.